Live today on Building in Public featuring Alex Mahedy from Pager. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, how are you, David?
Good. So,
Good. This is, I think, Gabby first. I had heard about you on Twitter before this, but we were talking to Gabby about kind of like the most interesting founders she's talked with, and she mentioned you, like, I think you were the first person she mentioned, and it sounds like she chatted with you like a while ago and kind of continued talking over time and stuff. So we'd love to hear how you started, like how you met her and what that story was.
Totally. I mean, I feel super fortunate to know Gabby because I don't think I would be here without knowing her. And so the relationship with how Gabby and I met actually involves another person, Danielle, who kind of first facilitated that introduction. And then, we had a kind of a first meeting, and I think we really aligned with on the idea that there is a missing element to social communication in our kind of current life. And as in that moment, it's never as clear as it is 9 months later. But I think that we really were sensitive to the kind of usage and consumption of life experiences on on all of these social platforms and all of these content platforms that then kind of has this missing life experience about about it, right? All of the social products that we have right now have really been about capturing the world, and we now spend like 4 or 5 hours a day on our phones, and that's like 30% of the waking day, and there's still no way to really share what we do during that time. And that's kind of the core thinking behind Pager at the highest of levels, is how do you enable people to start sharing their digital experiences with one another.
Yeah, totally. I linked the Medium post that you made, and it made a lot of sense. How did you start, like, when did you first start thinking about this stuff? Like, what was the genesis of the idea?
I mean, it goes way back, I think, for me at least 3 years. I think the first kind of nugget of wanting to build was just this desire to understand others and to try to learn about what people were feeling. And then I spent a couple years doing equity research on semiconductor architecture. And that was just kind of really put me into a space where I could start to talk to a lot of people with regards to AI. And so I was spending a lot of time in Palo Alto speaking with semiconductor companies to learn about what's going on there. And at the same time, I think I was seeing this really interesting trend with my friends, and we were creating these kind of topic-specific group chats where we would have, so for example, Formula One. We would have a Formula One chat, and everyone, who we know was into Formula One would be sharing content there. And we ended up having like 3 or 4 of the same chats across all of these different platforms, where it's the same participants, it's the same graph, but you're just restricted in your ability to move the content across the platforms. And so that started getting me interested in kind of building in social and building in the space. And I think it was, around March of 2019 when I first began to kind of think of the core idea of Pager, which is to build an interactive screenshot. And so that was a realization around what was going to be possible with computer vision over like the next 3 years, and what, how the kind of the screenshot captures what you see, and how you can, if you're a human, you see a screenshot, like you can figure it out. It's just a pain in the ass to do it, right? And so how can we build software that makes that, the most seamless of experiences?
Yeah. And do you imagine sort of the screenshot sounds like it's kind of the core unit around which people would gather to interact and collaborate? Is that something that happens kind of within a space in your mind, or do you sort of think about this unit that has its own properties that can be brought to other spaces?
It's a good question. I think it just depends on the adoption of the format, right? So I think that there was a moment in time where like Giphy, didn't exist, and there was a moment in time after Giphy exists,
right?
And very clearly see the impact that they had on the kind of zeitgeist of sharing GIFs, right? And so I think that it's definitely possible to see this become something like that. But I think in the near term, we're more focused on delivering the kind of social value proposition within the app before we move on to trying to get more people on board.
Right. So kind of inside the service, there's like a space where we collaborate, maybe the way we might on Figma or something, but that's obviously like a pro tool or a kind of a more professional version, but it's a place where we all gather and we have kind of this visual piece of media. So is that sort of the feel would be like, maybe I have a screenshot and I bring Mahedy into a space and we can draw together or do things to create media or improve it?
That's an interesting idea. It's not something we had been considering. I think that we've been more focused on trying to create a communication tool, a tool that can be used to broadcast some experience that you've had on your phone to many of your friends, right? And many of your friends can then open up their pager and see the page that you've shared with them, right? And so, I envision, I think this is actually, if we get to talking about process, I think this is one of the areas that I think the company is I guess, I've realized, I think is different than other social companies, is in the kind of the way that we were thinking about building is, I think, with a much greater focus on the vision that we have to enable. And so we're spending more time trying to understand what are the mechanics around the format that are going to work when the format is then able to deliver the experience that we expect it to deliver. So it's kind of a challenging coordination because there is it's a big technological lift, frankly.
Yeah.
And so that I think just it's a kind of different experience than I think what I see my founder friends experiencing.
Right. I wonder actually when I hear kind of social, and you mentioned kind of some of these technology pieces like computer vision, a lot of times these are sort of, I almost might say they're sort of different starting points, where people, I think sometimes in social tools, people are building kind of, very, let's say, like the details of a specific UX or a flow or even a brand design might really set the tone for what's happening. And then it sounds like some of the computer vision stuff, if that's critical to what you're doing, there's almost like a bunch of utility that you need to execute. And I wonder if you feel like you bias a little bit more towards one side of that or the other, or you can solve one first and then get to the other. How do you sort of think about the trade-offs there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think that I actually operate them as almost separate companies, frankly. And I have a different roadmap for CV than I have for our social products. And so from I believe, I very much believe that brand UX design is really important. But I think that at the same time, I have spent a lot more time in the product design focused on kind of just getting rid of the opportunities to make mistakes that other people have before me. And then on the computer vision side, it's a problem that we've defined and we understand how to solve, and it's simply a matter of actually just time and getting the non-computer vision product out that then allows that kind of engine to begin to turn. And so we think that we're trying to understand what is compelling without the computer vision, what becomes compelling with the computer vision, and to think about how that impacts the way that we think about the product that we're trying to build, right? So yeah, that's kind of how we try to think about that sort of stuff.
And are you sort of on one side or the other? Are you constantly building and kind of prototyping and kind of play testing different experiences, or do you sort of, how does the process of kind of discovery and tooling work? And you sort of talk about these two roadmaps. Are they two sub teams that are kind of coordinating from time to time, or some of the same players kind of across both?
It's two sub teams, and I wouldn't say that it's coordinating from time to time. I think it's more that there are distinct areas of overlap, and certain people, like say a specialist in iOS or a specialist in computer vision, is not involved necessarily with the integration of how their products have to communicate with one another, that there are people in the middle that then service that connection. So I think the way that we think about product design is that I think that you can figure out a lot of what isn't going to work by designing it in Figma, putting it on your phone, and playing through iterations of the game that you're trying to create. And with screenshots, I think in particular, and more generally just with the screen in general, and trying to enable the sharing of the screen, right? What can be captured by the format is infinite. And so it's actually really hard for us to define, say, a niche to pursue for how one person takes screenshots, or how a group of people take screenshots. And I think it's interesting because I actually think that's precisely why the screenshot is so interesting, because of the diversity of what it can capture and how many people use screenshots very differently. And so we have gone through the process of weeding through ideas about how to work with screenshots. And I think that process for us really is mostly in Figma. We build conviction on an idea, we start building it. And I think that we're not afraid of a course correction in the middle of the build cycle. So that happened last couple of weeks ago for us. And I think that we think about product very philosophically, and so when I think that when you make a bet on a product, what you're doing is you're presenting this thesis based on these factors that you believe to be true. And I think between when we present that thesis and when we deliver the product, my job is then to really do the best effort I can to validate or disprove those theses before the product even gets to being finished. Because if you play out the cycles in the game and you can see an example where everyone stops playing, then the experience breaks down much earlier than the cycle that you actually played it out to be. So, I think now we're more focused on, our team is relatively new. We've only hired everyone over like the last 8 weeks. So,
wow.
We're now finally kind of arriving at more of a clarified vision of what the product experience should look like, what is required from an infrastructure perspective to get there, and what the priorities are. But kind of for the first 2 months or so, it was very exploratory. Everything was open, and we then just tried to figure out what we were willing to bet on the most.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that process of exploration, particularly like behaviorally? I'm curious, what do you end up using screenshots for the most? What have you found like interesting use cases from other people? As you said, I'm sure there's like a huge diversity of ways people are playing with these.
Yeah, I think to answer that question directly, there are kind of 4 different types of use cases for screenshots. The predominant behavior, and this is a higher level category, is that the dominant behavior is either to save something or to share something. But then within that, you have the different types of content that these screenshots can capture. So it could be something that is aesthetic, right? So some design, something you see on the internet, maybe a photograph, something where it's simply just about the visual. Then there is a screenshot that is used to deliver entertainment. So this would be typically a screenshot of a meme, right? And so this entertainment is more ephemeral, right? And then there's kind of more lasting usages of screenshots where the content is more lasting, right? So, for example, a location or a recipe. And so then I'd say the last kind of type of screenshot is to share something that you cannot share, right? Or something that you have experienced directly that has no natural export mechanism, right? And so with regards to that's, I think, a really kind of broad composition of how people use screenshots. And that's how I think about it.
You mentioned the save versus share dichotomy. And I think there's a lot of energy that goes toward save with the intention to share later. And I suspect that if you sort of had the data, it would show that a lot of that stuff gets stuck on the phone and never gets shared. And I wonder, do you think a lot about kind of the saves that should become shares later, and how are there sort of opportunities there that you think might be able to be unlocked through some of these technology components?
I don't think I've thought about it in that particular context, right? With regards to kind of delaying the sharing of something. But we have spent a lot of time just thinking about whether or not saving is it's really valuable to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that with regards to kind of the delayed sharing, we tend to see that the sharing happens more kind of in the moment and instantaneously, right? So, and so when someone doesn't choose to share that, we would kind of think of that more as like a save, right? And that maybe you want to save or share that in the future. But so the stuff that I think has been really interesting is that if you start surveying people and you ask them why they take screenshots, they will tell you oftentimes about 50-50 it's to save the content rather than to share the content.
Mm-hmm.
And then you ask people if they ever go back to them, and 90% of people don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really hard position to be in as a founder, right? Because you look at that and you say there's a problem to be solved there.
Mm-hmm.
And the hard realization I think one has to come, or at least I've come to, is that that is not the viral product that will get you to the scale that you're looking to be at as a social company, right?
Right.
So the other thing that's important when kind of then thinking through how you're going to present your product and how you're going to build your product, and I heard this from someone who I described their product to, and their response was, if you can't explain it to a high schooler, then it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways in which we identify that we don't necessarily have the product is by the fact that it's hard to explain. If it's complex to explain, that explanation doesn't scale and people won't understand how to use it. And so we have really focused on trying to identify what is the most engaging and viral experience we can create, and what is the kind of simplest way we can present those options to you, so that the app is very easy to understand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely super interesting. Like, I keep thinking of the hype around Dispo and like people's excitement around that. And I almost would like much prefer to just see my friends' screenshots. I mean, I think that's so much more interesting than what they're proactively taking pictures of, like their food or wherever they're on vacation. But if I could see like what are they reading, or what did they happen to, I don't know. I think there's like so much information in there, and it's really interesting to think about how you would start circulating that and like let people.
Yeah, totally.
Stuff.
It's like almost as if you're able to, like in the similar way as to how the premise of Highlighter is to pick out the highlights, right? The screenshot is in effect the highlight of the digital experience, right? And being able to see your friends' highlights is a window into a behavior that like we have, but just cannot execute digitally, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that you're so right. That's what is exciting to us, is this idea that it'd be really interesting to be able to follow your friend's life online, and to be able to discover and engage with new topics and new ideas through that, process of following.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Misty mentioned Dispo. One of the things that I like about it, and I wonder if we'll start to see this kind of feature play out more broadly in social, is that everybody talks about sort of the overwhelming nature of pull to refresh on feeds and sort of too much content, and not necessarily focusing your time. And I think one thing that Dispo does nicely is it focuses a moment. You do your sharing, you do your consumption, you're kind of roughly done for the day until the next one. It feels like that kind of idea is actually, it's almost the kind of idea whose time has come, and it might actually be an idea that's actually bigger than just maybe the Dispo platform for such a concept. So I actually wonder about that time-based, let's call it like scheduled time-based social networking. Is that an area that you think sort of influences some of your thought, or is that kind of orthogonal to the themes that you spend a lot of time on?
I think that's something that we would have to test before we became seriously interested in pursuing it, right? I think the current thinking has been at the kind of more anatomical level of the product, right? What is the way in which you engage with the content? What is the way in which the content is presented to you? Is this a public feed or a private feed, bi-directional, et cetera, right? So I think when we get into thinking about, say, specific creative tools for screenshots or a specific way of delivering, I think those are decisions that we can consider, but that we cannot make an educated bet on at this moment in time, right? We actually need to have people use the app first before we make that kind of decision. But I was fascinated by it as well. I thought it was really interesting for a number of reasons to have the notification pop up at 9 a.m. every morning, right? I think on one hand, it's nice that there's like this delayed gratification that they talk about with regard to sharing the content, but that delayed gratification doubles or kind of converts into an engagement opportunity for the app in the next morning, right? So if they've already crossed the hurdle of getting me to open Dispo 9 a.m. the next morning, so my propensity to open Dispo then at a later time during that day is higher than if I hadn't taken a photo on the previous day. So I just think it's an incredible way. It's almost like a streak, right? It's almost like a streak. So I think there are so many clever things that we are coming up with, right? Regarding social, and I think it's an incredible time to be building in the space for the first time in almost a decade, right? So I see a lot of creativity and kind of boundary pushing that is really cool from my perspective.
I noticed you mentioned, I think you sort of mentioned the dichotomy of the aesthetic versus the entertainment. And I wonder if if and how you think about kind of the informational as one of the legs of a stool there.
So from the purposes of, say, the sharing of a piece of news, or the sharing of a how-to, or the sharing of a book, what kind of
I think about, like, a lot of my screenshots are like a passage. Maybe I was reading from Safari or something on Twitter and I clicked a link, and so I might screenshot like a tidbit of information that I find interesting, and sometimes I share it right away and sometimes I don't. But at least for me, I certainly have the aesthetic and the entertainment legs, but I also find that there's, like, at least in my own behavior, a lot of appetite around kind of the informational. I wonder if that's one that's come up at all for you, or if that's kind of outside the purview.
it's an interesting topic for me because I was working in a field where information and kind of reading was the name of the game, right? And so that kind of content
was in the semiconductor equity
research,
analysis?
Research,
yeah.
So it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of reading the news. It's a lot of like information discovery, right? And so screenshots of that information are like a really powerful tool. In a I don't know if it's an unfortunate way, but in a very real way, I think when I look at how people are being entertained right now, it is predominantly moving content and content that starts with some kind of action to hook you. And so I think that the information content is something that we can certainly pursue, but I think that we see for the people that we're interested in initially targeting, which is, I'd say, high schoolers and college kids, the content consumption tends to be more visual, right? And so I think that we're focused on, we're not averse to the information, right?
Sure, yeah.
But it's not like, I think it's not a priority for us right now.
You can say "Okay, boomer." I won't be offended.
No. It's hard because your interests fluctuate, and I think they fluctuate in different ways as you get older. And I think as I left school and started my work, I became more of a reader, and now that I'm kind of more in social, I'm spending a lot of my time on social apps and trying to understand what's working about them, what's not, and so it just evolves over time, right?
Yeah,
it's all like intertwined though. Like, I don't know, I would love to just like jam a little bit on kind of interesting use cases, and also kind of I'm curious about literally what do you find yourself screenshotting the most now, and what was that like 6 months ago? Has that been changing? Because I think of like, I don't know, if I were in high school, maybe I would be like screenshotting like stills from TikTok videos and talking about them. At the same time, I'm like screenshotting something from Instagram at the same time as I'm screenshotting something from like, I don't know, Twitter. Like it's somehow like pulling together all these different kind of meta commentaries on different people's social media posts in a way it could be, as well as the informational stuff of what DK was saying. Like if you're reading a PDF or something, there's no good way of highlighting or talking about it.
Yeah.
But,
So I think that I guess going back to when we think about the different types of screenshots that there are, the use cases differ as the company evolves, right? And so the most initial use cases, I think, are going to be around content that can be consumed in and of itself, right? So a still of a TikTok video isn't that interesting. If you've ever, I did this exercise with my designer a couple of days ago, and I messaged them a video and a screenshot from that video, and I was just like, which one would you rather click? And I think that's why we invest so much in the software, right? Is because if you're really going to make this format work and you're going to enable people to share the screen, you have to understand how to enrich that experience to make it convey the reason why people sent it in the first place, right? So the kind of initial use cases, I think, are just finding things that you like on the internet and just kind of screenshotting them and reposting them to your profile. And I think we've initially been this very, very simple app. It's almost like a Tumblr, right? That you're just reposting the screenshots that you like, and other people can repost them, etc. And so just starting at something really basic, because I think when you think about the idea of even capturing the screen, it is in effect reposting that content the first time. So we think that we're mostly focused on this kind of more aesthetic, vibey, interior design style of content that you find on Instagram, etc. And then in terms of the screenshots I take, let me look on my phone. I take screenshots of mostly right now. It's mostly UI, because that is the
makes sense.
Designers and product owners like take a ton of screenshots of their product because they're constantly kind of nitpicking what is right and what is wrong. But for me, I've enjoyed, I take screenshots of where I want to go or things I would like to do in my life across many different platforms, right? So if it's an Instagram profile or a location on Google Maps, like I really like to at least know that when I have Pager built, that stuff will become valuable to me with time. I screenshot a lot of Snapchats. I think for me, Snapchat is a fascinating kind of product because I actually think it created modern day screenshotting in a way. So I love capturing the pictures my friends send of me, or that we have funny pictures that we send to each other, etc. And then conversations and songs. When we look at like the distribution of my screenshots, I think I had 30% of them were Instagram, 20% of them were Snapchat, 15% of them were iMessage, Twitter, restaurants. So that's kind of the main buckets that we see people like me screenshotting, but I think everyone has a different experience of it. So one of the early people that we talked to when we were first ideating the initial ideas of Pager last fall, I remember we were really struck by her because she had created these collections of workouts on Instagram and had built a book of maybe 40 or 50 workouts that she could just do whenever she wanted. And she canceled her Peloton subscription. She canceled her Equinox subscription and was working out for free on Instagram through these collections. And her friends really wanted to see them, right? And her friends were asking her, what are the workouts I can do? And so I think that when we look at what we think people will screenshot, we believe it to be whatever it is that they see. Literally, what I know it feels like a vague answer, but literally whatever it is that they see on their phone that they want to communicate to their friends in the same way, right? The current system that we have for the way we deliver content is so siloed, right? That you can have an Instagram folder with these 40 videos and then have a YouTube bookmarked with those 40 videos and then maybe TikTok, another one, right? And so all of this content lives separately and it becomes very hard to actually leverage the things that you collect on the internet and make use of them because they're all in different places.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the curation aspect, kind of taking from various sources and bundling them into some sort of a curated collection that helps you kind of share and express at the meta level. Is that kind of core to what?
Yeah, I think that's, it's not, I don't think we see it being an action that happens in drops, right? It's more constant contributions that we're trying to enable. But if you say hadn't opened up your pager for the day, you might find yourself having a bunch of different pieces of content in different collections that you could be exploring that your friends have contributed to.
Right.
That's cool.
And you mentioned the person who was doing the Instagram workouts. How did you find her, or what was your approach to sort of just doing a little bit of research on how people were using screenshots or any of the early stuff?
So let's say I decided I was going to start working on Pager last December. And so we did an initial 500-person user research, very qualitative, unfortunately. So it was very hard to, it was very time consuming to, analyze the information. But it proved to be really insightful. And so we in that survey, we were speaking to predominantly 18 to 26-year-olds in the US that have iPhones. And we were asking them questions about what they wanted in the social experience and how they use screenshots today, and how they more generally bookmark content. I mean, the first initial concept of Pager was this idea that you could have simultaneously share both screenshots and links into the same app. And I just quickly realized that it's not focused, right? It's not a clear reason why you should go to Pager if you can do two things. And so, we ended up at just on screenshots. And so then we ran another survey in October, again, 500 people, same demographic, but we looked at people who also had social media apps on their phone, or identified as having social media apps on their phone. And then we got more specific about how people use screenshots, and that was very quantitative work. And then to kind of supplement that quantitative work, we then conducted about 25 user interviews over the fall. This was a combination of kind of running ads on Snapchat and paying people to give us their feedback, and of finding people at my brother's high school that were willing to talk to us and their friends, and try to get enough degrees of separation out that it's not going to impact the results, but enough where you can kind of still control the expected demographic or the kind of type of person you're talking to.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. When I wonder, when you sort of are spending a lot of time with these various social tools, I wonder if there are kind of new emergent themes that you've observed that you start to, you kind of explore. And so one thing, obviously relevant to what we're doing here is we're live. And I think in a way, live feels like a bit of a new area to explore around social products. Certainly, I think there's the shopping stuff and the audio rooms, and there's a bunch of different live experiences that are coming to kind of the internet. And I wonder, is there does anything in the live space sort of intrigue you around sort of how screenshots might be used in a live context?
Yeah, I'm certainly interested in it. I think just the screen in general fascinates me. We are working with screenshots right now because we see that as the thing people do the most already, what people are already comfortable with, and an action that they're used to taking. And it's the greatest volume of content that we have out there. I think we estimate about 150 billion screenshots in the US, right, on iPhones. So it's a lot of screenshots, right, that people have already. And so I think, on that front, I don't think we're necessarily going to pursue live in the near term. I think this is really a debate about synchronous versus asynchronous kind of communication. And I think in social, it's very hard to build a synchronous product. And I think it requires almost immense coordination between people that, in the randomness of the world, doesn't necessarily really present itself as often as we might think it does. The best example, I think, of a synchronous app was House Party, right? That was the I think, in my opinion, and then Clubhouse, right? But I think Clubhouse was advantaged by the geolocation of people relative to kind of where they are normally. And so, I think that our focus is on asynchronous because it's what we believe will enable people to actually engage with one another and provide the feedback loops that you need to feel good about what you've shared, right?
Right. I know that you mentioned iOS already, and it seems to be a common starting point for, let's say kind of the San Francisco, Silicon Valley style, kind of startup creation. But screenshots in particular have like a bunch of advantages, like simpler APIs, I think, for accessing a lot more in the Android ecosystem. And I wonder, have you felt any pull or things that you wanted to do that maybe could only be accomplished in Android?
I think the advantages of iOS are around the consistency and performance of the environment and the demographic of users that you reach from a starting point. So with regards to API access, it's certainly true that there are, I think, more interesting things going on with screenshots in Android, right? But that's in a way the fun part of the challenge, right? Is how do you do this with no help, right? And that's, I think, what the route that we've chosen to pursue very intentionally, because I think that when it comes to the maturation of the format, the better that you understand it, the better you can enable it to do the things that people want, right? And so if you're relying on a third party to give you the data that you need right now, when you get to that point in the future, I think that you wouldn't necessarily know what you might want to know. And so, yeah, it's an interesting point. Initially the way we had initially thought about it was more about screen sizes and consistency in screen sizes. And over time that need for consistency in screen sizes has diminished. And so now it's more of an efficiency and kind of continuity perspective, right? That it would be kind of cost prohibitive right now to start developing an Android application, although
sure,
I definitely think we will.
Yeah. I'm team iOS too, so I feel you.
You're so right. I mean, I think it is interesting. I think also the way we thought about it with this stuff was like, all right, let's get to building. If there's something cool that comes out from an API perspective, we're positioned to take advantage of it. But sure, if it doesn't materialize, like, I don't want to really be waiting for it to materialize.
Right. Well, speaking of kind of the process around kind of the waiting versus sort of executing, it sounds like you mentioned the last 8 weeks you've sort of done a lot more of kind of the team assembly, and I wonder if you could share a bit about sort of what the team looks like and how that process was, and were these people who you already knew or were just meeting? Were they excited about the product or the problem, or sort of how did it all come together?
Totally. So let's see. Pager started with a bunch of interns from Duke, to be honest, and we really hacked together the first prototype of the app. Some of those interns stayed with us throughout the winter, and when we fundraised in January, we were starting with that as the foundation. And then I have really no technical network. I worked in finance. I studied philosophy. I went to a liberal arts school. Like, really, other than the experience I had as my first internship doing research on human-computer interaction and doing the semiconductor architecture research, I've never worked in an engineering environment. And so the way the team construction was really an interesting time for me. I had to build a very strong team very quickly, and the first person that we got close to hiring was Duncan, and Duncan is based in Berlin. He is one of the brightest people I've met. Has a PhD in quantum cosmology and has been doing machine learning infrastructure at a company in Berlin for the past 7 years before joining us. And so I met him through the postdoc that I worked for in Toronto when I was 15. And so that's how I got connected to Duncan. We had someone join us from an existing computer vision startup. I'm not going to share it right now because I think it's just best at this moment. Sure. But he was running the computer vision search teams at one of the largest image kind of ranking companies out there. And so he actually applied to work at Pager. I did not know him, and he wrote me a really amazing email. And it was very clear. Almost, I think at a certain point, I remember this felt too good to be true. It was really quite, I felt very fortunate there.
How did he know about Pager? Was there a blog post he'd read or he heard about it from somebody?
I think my understanding was that we were being a bit more public on social media at that point after we'd done our fundraising, and we're trying to recruit people. And we published a Medium post that we then, I think, kind of caught his eye. So then through Gabby, I connected with a former Stanford alum who is working at a company in Tel Aviv. And through them, I found two engineers in Tel Aviv that are amazing. They have both about a decade of experience coding. One is on the server and one is on iOS. And they've recently joined the team full-time on their own. And so, that's kind of how, and one of our interns joined us full-time at the beginning of this week. So that's kind of the composition of the engineering team. And then with regards to product design, I view myself as a skilled product thinker, but I'm not a designer. I've never done this before. And so I very much go into the world with that mindset of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but if I find and ask the right questions and find the right people, then, we can figure it out together. Yep. So I think it's very hard to find a product designer as a product thinker, as a CEO, because you really don't know what it's like to work with them over an extended period of time. And so I hired a number of people on temporary kind of agreements and paid everyone whatever they were looking to get paid, but was very focused on trying to work with as many people as possible over the course of kind of 3 weeks. And so we spent those 3 weeks, about 6 of us, working in different Figmas, all sketching out different ideas and trying to come up with theses on what Pager could be, because we really started with a blank canvas at that point. And I remember one of the designers that had been interested in the role, the first meeting we had after like the second week, he presented this website of what he thought Pager should be, and I was blown away by it. And I was like, this is amazing, the initiative that this person has taken to create not only a design, but an animation and host it on the website to deliver it as a package. I thought was just such a identifier of passion that I really wanted in the person that was going to be designing this product. And so that's how we've brought the team together. So I think we're now 7 or 8. I've lost count already. But yeah.
And on that design process, it sounds like there was kind of you said there were 6 of you all working together. So maybe you plus, were there kind of like 5 people who were sort of professional design professionals? And
Yeah, we work with a number of independent designers who were freelancers interested in potentially having a full-time opportunity. And then we worked with a phenomenal product studio in Medellin called Makata. And it's really fun. They work a lot in 3D. And so very, very unique ideas. It was really a joy to have this kind of diversity of all of these different ways in which Pager could become something, right?
Yeah. Also, kind of curious. We didn't touch on your own background so much, but I'm very intrigued. Like you said, you were working with a postdoc when you were a teenager. Like, what did you study, and what was it like? Working in equity research. I think a lot of probably recent grads end up working in finance or tech, and the jump to actually being like, okay, I should start a startup. How did that feel, and was that something you'd been thinking for a while about?
I've had a person I spoke with recently described my career as meandering in a very good way. And so I think that, in my head, I've had a couple of kind of core different experiences around what a CEO needs to have experience to be a good CEO. And so first was doing research on human-computer interaction. We were focused on understanding humans' perception of latency. And so we were kind of doing experiments and stuff like that. I then, after I worked 2 summers there at the University of Toronto, and then Tesla asked me to join their team in the middle of my senior year of high school. So I started skipping classes to go sell cars downtown New York. And so I did that for 3 years into university. I studied philosophy with a real passion for photography. So I love taking photographs. I love taking film. And when I mentioned I don't know if I mentioned it, but I did a road trip after I graduated that I spent a lot of time in the kind of Midwest taking pictures of people having kind of grown up in New York my life. It was, I wanted to kind of see how other people lived in the country. And so then in equity research, I think, I mean, I have like my own unique story behind equity research. I think my experience in equity research is different than other people's experiences in equity research. It's a very small team, 10 analysts, very flat organizational structure. Everyone was kind of given a task and almost no communication until you were done with researching that task. But what I loved about the experience was the research. I mean, oh my God, the availability of information that I was able to access was intoxicating, right? I mean, really, I think I was so fortunate to be in that position to have access to the top, 5 semiconductor startups in the world, to go to the conferences when these new chips are being announced, or when GPT-3 is being announced for the first time. Like, to be there, to be able to talk to those people, I think is an incredible blessing, because I'm a very experiential learner. So I learn from talking to someone, getting an explanation, abstracting it, etc. So the decision to start a company arose from I think you have to start a company with a great deal of research, right? So you have to know why your company is going to work as best you can. What are the secular trends? What are your bets on what the future of the world looks like? And specifically, I focused on 3 areas, right? I was focused on semiconductor architecture for AI. So beyond a GPU, how do you accelerate the performance of inference and training models? That is a technical problem specific to the structure of CPUs and GPUs, right? And then the cloud and 5G, right? And so, I think that I had a vision for what the world was going to be in 10 years, and I could see it. And the only thing I could do was provide a recommendation on an investment decision. And that felt very lacking for me, right? That I was seeking to build that vision and to pursue the challenge of building that vision, right? So I think that's how to wrap it up, how I got to the pager.
Yeah.
Let's go. And speaking of wrapping, I want to be sensitive to the time, because I know we're almost at the 2:00 hour, and we're kind of running to the end of the time we agreed to spend together. But I think before wrapping, I'd like to kind of ask kind of a final question that we often end with, which is, we'd love to hear kind of what things you're curious about in the world. And it could be things that, certainly you're curious about the stuff you're working on, but there might be other topics, kind of divergent things. Could be books you're reading, or, tweets you've seen, or, anything at all, really. So we just want to hear what you're curious about these days.
I think because of the way my brain works, I'm curious about almost everything. And that is like the nexus of my ADHD, right? It's like everything fascinates me. And I'm incredibly observant, right? So I love to just soak in what is around me and try to, it may not come to me right then, but like the things percolate. So I'm not a big reader. I read a lot of articles, but not books right now. So the things that I think I'm most curious about are like self-improvement and learning. I spend a lot of time working on myself. So I have an executive coach, I have a therapist, like those are, I think, very key parts of like how to grow as a person that you just, I think, aren't really aware of as a kid, right? I don't think, I just think that like life has a way of really not telling you what is ahead that I find to be interesting and keep, like, I think about a lot, right? Like, how do I continue to make myself the best version of myself so that I can achieve the things that I want to achieve and make the impact that I want to have.
That's great. So self-improvement, I guess, is kind of a core piece of the startup journey itself. Is the startup is improving every day, little bit by bit, and then you, as kind of the one of the creators and team members who's helping it improve bit by bit, wouldn't be surprising that you also have a keen interest in your own self-improvement. So that's
I think it's a key part of life, and I think it's just something that I think we are the kind of the Gen 2 of social media, really almost limited. And I think the where I see the kind of the future is on, I think, more openly identifying the path of growth, right, that a human pursues over their life. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's fun.
Awesome. Well, with that, I want to wrap and thank you, Alex, for spending the time with us and sharing the Pager vision and story and your own background. It's great to get to hear all the twists and turns and all the thinking behind what you're working on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Nishi and David. I really appreciate it. It was a really fun experience. My first live interview.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so exciting!
I'm glad we could be the ones.
Yeah. No, great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day and see you again. Take care. Bye.
See you.